Hey, it's Drybear. And the honeymoon phase has worn off, in my opinion, for Arc Raiders, so I think it's a good time to give a review. Between all the tests as well as the live version of the game, I'm well over 300 hours right now in Arc Raiders, so I just want to give my perspective on where the game is right now, what it does really well, what it does decently, and what it could improve on in the future, and what you should expect for it moving forward as well. But before we get into my thoughts, drop yours down below. How are you feeling about Arc Raiders right now? Are you still playing regularly in your normal cycle rotation? Are you someone that picked up the game and has been falling off? Because there are some people that are like that in general. And just let me know like what your expectations are for Arc Raiders in future updates and how you're feeling about, are you still liking the game? Are you still enjoying it? Are you looking forward to stuff? Or are you just kind of already falling off and you've moved it out of your game rotation? Now, the first thing worth mentioning is regardless of how much discussion there is right now on whether the game needs new modes or needs to be changed or is perfect as is, everyone's got an opinion in that sort of thing. But I think one thing that's worth mentioning right now is the game as a product is working and growing. A concurrent player base count like this kind of graph is excellent. There are thousands of games that get launched every single day, and 99.99999% of them will never reach this level. And usually with games like this, especially when they have a premium price tag, I know some people have the notion that premium means $60 or more, even though it's $40 base in US currency. It is a premium price because it's not free to play. You have to buy to play it. So when there is a currency required, a payment required barrier of entry, typically games like this will see a large reduction in their player base because some people aren't willing to shell out the money in order to play it. So not only is it growing and exceptionally large, you can look at the player base here, right? Like it's still hitting new records every single week in the concurrent player count on the forward-facing one that we can see for Steam, but also keep in mind that it's on consoles as well. And for a game like this, I would reckon that PlayStation is probably slightly larger than PC and Xbox is probably around the same, if not maybe slightly less than PC. So I would say the daily CCU peak for this game probably is around 1.1 to 1.2 million combined across all platforms, which puts it in one of the, in the category of one of the largest games in the world right now. So whether you think things are wrong or you don't like rats or campers or you don't like extraction or you don't like the price tag or whatever else, the facts is that the game is working, it's incredibly successful, and people are liking it, and they're liking it so much that they're playing it for long periods of time, and they are returning to play again, which we as developers call retention. The D7, D14, and the D30 retention for this game seems to be exceptional because as we saw the launch here, it's been almost a month now, and a lot of those players are sticking around. It's still getting new players every single day. Anytime doing dev work or working with other studios trying to get their games out and things like that, in this kind of situation where the numbers look good, the retention is really strong, and people are super interested, the number one thing that the game needs right now is not massive change, it is more, and more. More content, more maps, more weapons, more items, more locations, more everything, because it just needs to have more, right? And I think a big test for them is going to be over the next 3 months, like going into Q1 of 2026, seeing how the game holds up and how people stick with the game once we have resets and things like that. But we're kind of at that point now where people should have been falling off already if they were going to instantly dislike the game for what it is. And I think one of the biggest areas that they can do that in is adding more dynamic elements. Things like the matriarch encounter, things like the harvester encounter, finding dynamic ways to interact with the space that's already there and adding new ideas. And they've been doing a great job of that. I think Stella Montis was a great addition to the game in general that kind of brought a different style of map that's separate from everything else. And I hope they can continue to do that as they move forward. In general, it seems like the PvE element is working, but we're kind of getting to that point where I think a lot of players are getting very comfortable dealing with the types of arcs they're facing. The Shredder was a nice addition. It felt like it was quite different and also fit really well for Stella Montis, the indoor tight corridors, that kind of shotgun shred aspect that it has, I think fits perfectly for that style. But we're kind of getting to that point, and this is why PvE games in general tend to get staler faster than pure PvP, is because once you can figure out the AI and how to abuse it and how to punish it, things get a little bit more straightforward and easy. So I think they need to find ways to keep mixing that up and pushing it forward. And overall, I think the PvP is great too, and I think there's been this ongoing discussion on whether PvP is in the game at all, and some people like it, some people don't, but I actually think it's that Wild West mentality that means that you know, it actually adds to the retention that they're receiving right now on what people actually play and how long they play the game for. It's the fact that you don't really know what's going to happen when you go topside, because it's more of a playground, a sandbox that allows you to play your own way, fight in different ways, whether you want to fight players, fight bots, try to complete a quest, do these dynamic events like the Harvester, or, you know, try to loot down in Stellamontis. There's tons of different things that you can do in this game that I think allow more variety in your experiences every time you go topside, and I think that's actually a boon for them in general. I also want to comment on the gunplay. This is something that a lot of TPS and FPS games struggle with, even some of the bigger budget ones. It does take a very specific skill set to make the gunplay in shooting games feel really good. How fast it fires, the sounds that it makes, how it views itself, like how it shows itself to the player when it's firing, the damage that it does, the time to kill, the reload times, like all of those are very carefully crafted. And I would say in general, they've got it into a really good spot right now. There's still problems. Obviously, we just saw the Venator getting nerfed and being brought down a little bit as well. But I think in general, they did a good job of kind of honing that in. Anyone that played the tech test know how absolutely busted things like the Renegade or like the Anvil used to be. They've done several rounds of nerfs before the game even came out that put it in a good spot, and I think they just have a good mix of things, and they just need to keep adding to that because it is a loot-based game to make sure that you're staying interested as you go through and find loot to put on. Next, we can talk about a couple negatives, things that I think are good areas of improvement for Arc Raiders. There's actually a long list of like small to moderate things that should be hopefully addressed in the next couple months, or is at least on the developer's mind as they're looking through it. And I would say the first of those is going to be coming from Traversal on small things. Like there's actually just some really awkward movement on that front. And here's what I mean by that. I think in general, the movement is really good, having you slowed when your weapon is out, the stamina management, being able to slide and roll and dodge and things like that. And I also think that, you know, general, you know, traversal through the terrain is actually quite good. And also, if you are at a point or at a height where you can mantle, that's also really good. I think in general, so if it's like shoulder height or head height or a little bit higher, their mantle system is actually quite good, even like jumping to other areas and then mantling onto the surface, that sort of thing. But anything lower than shoulder is really awkward and in my opinion, incredibly frustrating. I've actually died to this a few times where like if you run to like an ankle height or shin height, like it zeroes out your momentum when you bump into things, which means that when you're trying to jump over small areas and you don't get that mantle animation, it gets really awkward. Like you'll just bump into it and try to climb and try to climb. And sometimes you mantle randomly like on this tree. And especially on like some of the maps like Dam or like Buried City, where there's a lot of like rock formations outside. When you get to that height where it's like not quite high enough to mantle, but you're trying to get on top of it, you just keep bumping into it and falling flat. And again, on some of the areas, like even like especially rock formations, anything like terrain wise, where you don't get a mantle animation, where if it's a little bit short, you'll just get stuck and you'll just bounce and jump and bounce and jump and bounce and jump. So I think this could be an area of really easy kind of low hanging fruit for them to improve, and it's just giving us a little bit more forward momentum when we bounce off of terrain to make sure we don't get into that stuck. I can't find any here on the practice range, but there's tons of cases out where you just like, again, like you'll just get into this loop of like, I'm trying to climb, then you bounce backwards and you try to climb and you can't get over it. It's too short, it's not high enough to mantle and you can't quite get there. And you're literally just doing this animation over and over trying to get over it and you slide back down. I think they can improve that a lot. Next would be the idea of late spawns. Now, the player base size that it is right now, I think that the matchmaking can be a little bit more lax. When you have, you know, 1 million plus concurrent players every single day, your matchmaking can be a lot more aggressive. However, I think that the spawn logic is one item, as well as the late spawn logic is also another item. So the first one for spawn logic, I think that there's tons more they could do on improving spawn logic. Like there's tons of cases, especially on Stellamontis, where you'll spawn and it's a guaranteed spawn and players will camp that spawn. And I think there needs to be more logic in the game that says that if there are players nearby the spawn, choose a different spawn so you don't spawn in. I think there should never be a case in extraction game where when you're doing that slow motion animation where you zone in, like you're first coming into the map on your first, you know, your first opening seconds, I feel like you should not have any enemies near you at that time. There should be a safe spawn, some kind of safe location, you're tucked away somewhere. They do have that, but I think in some cases it can be quite abusable by some people. So I think they just need to do more about making the spawn logic work. Secondly, on the spawn logic thing, I think there's also some situations on where the indoor arc robots can spawn in very unfair ways. I don't think this happens too much with like the drones or like the outdoor ones, like the wasps, hornets, things like that. I think those are obviously, they have a really loud animation where the smoke comes down and they appear out of nowhere and they start attacking you, or like you can see them coming. And they also have really good sound notifications. But there have been many times where I'm inside a building and I had a pop spawn right next to me, like 2 feet away from my character, just right next to me, and immediately explode. Like, I cleared the room, no sounds, you don't hear the pop going off, you don't hear anything else, and it just spawns new fireballs or new pops right next to your character, and you just get completely screwed over from it. I think they need to do a better job, again, working on the spawn logic there. I also think they need to think through what they want to do with the late spawn tech. Now, having late spawns, especially in an extraction game, can be interesting, right? Because not only does it mean that when players either disconnect or get killed and the player count dwindles during a extraction run, you can replenish those numbers with late spawners, right? So if it spawns with 30 players or 25 players and then 12 of them die in the opening 5-10 minutes, then you can spawn another 10 players and you can fill that out. Then the extraction becomes more tense and is more interesting. So I kind of get that in general. I think there's been a couple ideas floated online about this, about making sure that free loadouts are prioritized for the late spawns versus not. But I do think that in general, the amount of late spawns feels like it's a bit much. And also personally for me, when the amount of loot on the map is fixed, meaning that I can't actually get, you know, like it doesn't respawn, there's no extra loot, it's not coming, like, you know, there's not a tree growing loot over and over. When I spawn late and I know that everything's already been looted, my 2 options, at least in my mind, are either A, I'm just gonna extract immediately and go again, because, you know, like, am I just gonna go run through all these areas that no longer have any loot available? Or you're kind of heavily incentivized to PvP, right? Like, if you spawn with 18 minutes left, like 12 minutes, I've actually spawned with 14 minutes remaining one time. It didn't happen again, but one time it was like 14 minutes and 30 seconds, and my jaw dropped. I was like, okay, after 15 minutes of runtime on this map, what is the chance that any of the POIs, the points of interest, have any loot remaining, right? So again, my only options are run to extract and go again, which is it's kind of a waste of my time if that's the case, or I'm forced to PvP, right? Especially in solos where PvP can be hit or miss depending on who you're shooting at. My only option if I want to get any loot from that run is just to go kill players and take their loot, which some people like, some people don't. I don't mind it, but there's definitely a lot of people that get very upset over PvP in this game. The next area of improvement, at least for me, is I actually, and maybe this is a controversial opinion, I think that the looting needs to be improved. And, you know, it is a means to an end. At the end of the day, you're going through POIs and you're looking for loot and you're kind of opening things, breaching things. But at least for me, you know, after a couple hundred hours of the game, I am starting to get a little bit, it starts to feel a little bit monotonous in the looting, partially because most things are inside of the containers, and the containers in some cases don't spawn. Like, you'll run into rooms that is full of lockers, but none of the actual lockers spawn, so you have this empty room where you run through, or you're just breaching or searching the same things over and over. So, you know, to the same effort of trying to add more dynamic elements to the game, I think they could probably make the looting a lot more interesting with what you open, how you open, what you look at, and also adding some randomness into it with the actual, like, the celebration of the loot, not in the kind of loot you get, which is already random, right? You'll still find random stuff laying around, or when you open a box and it gets identified, that's all random as well. But I mean, like, having, you know, piñatas and little things you can open and things that drop from the ceiling, or breaking a light open, or, you know, just more of that, right? We have some of those. We can do the puzzles on Blue Gate, or you can do like the keyed rooms and stuff like that. But I think we need a lot more, and they probably could also run through some of the other choices on what they want to do and how they want to do it for, like, the maps that get added to the game in the future. I also think it would be a good opportunity for them to play around with moving the loot concentration areas. Now, some of this is challenging because these areas are, by level design, meant to be contested, right? So like all these maps, you have like your low value, your open value, your medium value, and then your high value loot areas. But I do think it gets kind of repetitive and monotonous if those are always in the same place every time, month after month. And I think it would be a fun mix up if you went to a map and based on when you loaded into the map, it would change the loot locations. Like, what if you loaded into Damn Battlegrounds once and all of a sudden Ruby Residence and Pale Apartments were high loot value out of nowhere, right? And then the Hydroponic Dome Complex is low or medium, right? If those could move around, like go to the areas that aren't designated, go to the areas that aren't open, randomize where those go, get different kinds of loot. You can keep like the categories the same, like industrial, security, commercial, whatever else, if that's what you want to have fixed locations. But I do think it is kind of repetitive if I'm getting to a point that when I load into a map and my strategy is the same every time. Like I want to go to the high loot locations if I can. If I have a key, I go to the keyed rooms, or I try to move to the yellows. But especially if you get a late spawn and you know exactly where the loot value areas are, I feel like it just starts to get a little bit more repetitive, and that's something that they can improve on over time. The other area that's worth talking about, and it's one of those things that's always going to be a problem, and I think Embark just needs to keep working at it. Currently, there are a good number of bugs in the game that are quite debilitating. Things like being able to get into the loot rooms without opening the door at all, right? Glitching through the door, having client-side issues where on your client the door is closed and so you think you're safe. On their client the door is open and so they can shoot through the door and hit you even though there's no one there because the door is closed for you. I also feel like they could improve the hatch escape too. They could probably just make it so the hatch escapes, that when you jump into them, they function just like the normal escapes. Just allow us to jump in the freaking hole. Having that fixed animation that you're technically damageable even though you're already in the hole of the hatch just feels really awkward and weird. I think it would go a long way if they improved just the process of opening the radar hatches, entering the radar hatches, and being able to extract. No one likes to get in a situation when you're down but not out, trying to get over that little lip and you can't get up into the extraction for the hatch. No one wants to be in a situation where your character visibly goes down into the hole, but then a hornet somehow stuns you and pulls you back out of the hole and then knocks you down and you can't escape, things like that. Another area that I think they could improve upon is weapon mods. I actually think that the majority of the weapon mods in the game, outside of like magazine editions, could be a lot more interesting. A lot of times it just comes with like recoil or controlling the weapon when it fires or stability, but also they have like this kiss curse mentality where they like to put like slower things on it. Like you can just get some grips on stuff and actually like improve things with stability wise, but it also comes with a downside. I think they could do a lot more fun stuff, and they are kind of doing that with a lot of the legendary level weapon mods, like with the anvil splitting. But I think they could do more, or just add more weapons that kind of blend with that. But I think they could get a little bit more creative with the weapon mods too. Next, there's a little bit of discussion that goes around the idea of these resets and expeditions, and I think they have been very wishy-washy on this reset thing. We're going to be going through our first reset in a couple weeks now, actually in December, with the next update. With the expeditions completing, you'll have the choice to reset. However, I think this brings up a great topic around the items that are very hard to acquire. Because obviously with resets, typically in extraction games or even just loot-based games, you're willing to reset and lose all your items and start over and start progressing again. It gives you a chance to play around with the talent tree. It gives you a chance to play around with different builds and stuff like that. However, I think there are a couple things that are existing inside of the gameplay loop and the collection loop for our creators that are a little bit up in the air right now on what they should be doing, how it should feel. The first one is going to be blueprints. I think there actually are a lot of blueprints in the game that are so exceptionally rare that I think for a lot of players, depending on how often and how frequently they play, may only see that blueprint once during a reset cycle, or maybe even not at all. Things like the Wolf Pack, the Silencer, extended mags, especially the Venator, some of the blue or purple quality weapons with those blueprints. Once you finally, there are people that are going to spend the full, 2-3 months on a reset trying and maybe eventually getting one blueprint for it, and then they reset and they lose it. So I think there actually needs to be some kind of concession on that front. Maybe make blueprints a little bit easier to get, or maybe make it so that when you reset for the expedition, you don't lose blueprints, or maybe you get to choose a couple of them that you get to keep when you reset. I think it's a little bit too harsh. Typically with loot-based games, you're perfectly fine with just resetting and losing the items that you've collected, but there are some permanent upgrades like the blueprints that are incredibly painful to lose when you reset. Same thing goes for the talents, like the skill tree in general. There's two kind of major notes on that in general. It does actually take quite a while for your average player to be able to max out their skill tree and get to 75 or whatever and get all those skill points. And I think that skill tree or talent tree in general as a reset option could also add to that friction of people maybe not wanting to reset just because of the time it takes to max out. And the second point on that is obviously for the people that don't choose to reset, I do think they desperately need some kind of concession on whether or not people that don't reset are going to be able to like change their talent tree or their skill tree in general. It probably was just an oversight. It didn't make it into the launch version of the game. I'm sure they're discussing this kind of idea internally on what they want to do with resets in general, or if you should be able to reset your skill tree. But I do think that there needs to be some kind of fallback or some give on being able to fix a skill build that you don't like, especially if they're going to be nerfing things like the security locker during a reset cycle. You get kind of screwed over by that. If you go for the security locker, then they nerf it, and now you can't reset your skill tree, and it's kind of annoying. So I think it's another thing that they need to kind of have a solution for after next month on what happens with expeditions and how that feels to reset in general. But that's where we're at. I think the game is excellent. It's doing very well. It just in every possible metric, the game is well liked, well loved, and beloved in general. So I think that a lot of people are really going to like this game. Obviously, I still see people commenting every day how they don't like how there's PvE in the game and so they're quitting, or they don't like how there's PvP in the game or they're quitting, or they just don't like extraction shooters in general. Like they don't like the pain and suffering that comes with extraction shooters, which is part of the gameplay loop where you bring things you like and you have attachment to, and sometimes you're going to die and lose them, and that's just part of the cycle. And some people just don't like that, right? There are people that like to have, they want to play Satisfactory, or they want to play, a single player game where they can make steady progress and they don't have to worry about constantly getting setbacks or suffering tragedy, which is a big part of extraction shooters in general, and something that I think that makes this game interesting and fun and dynamic each time you go topside. Let me know what you think. Do you like the game? How do you feel? Like, where's your head at on the game in general? Do you feel like you're actually getting your money's worth? Do you feel like you're excited about it? Are you happy for new events and new things? Are you playing it regularly as you move through your whole gameplay experience? Or what would you say is your vibe right now on Arc Raiders now that we've kind of moved past the first month of launch? Kind of merged those two words together, didn't I? If you found value in today's video, leave a like down below, leave a comment for the algorithm to help this video get seen by more people, and don't forget to check out my other channels for other content and other stuff and other things.